Hi everyone, Bringthany Death Tano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of the new Ab-Soul album, Do What Thou Wilt. Ab-Soul, Top Dog Entertainment's own abstract asshole. One of the more interesting artists on the label's roster, in my opinion, and that's because he's a bit of a conundrum. He's hard to categorize. He's not quite as highbrow or as conscious as a guy like Kendrick, but it's not like he makes totally lowbrow or ignorant music either. And I don't think he inhabits some kind of middle ground or middlebrow area with his tunes either. I actually think Ab-Soul's wordplay, the way that he structures verses, his one-liners, are all really smart. But he typically uses his talents to say something really trashy and kind of hilarious. He's basically the kind of artist who would say something like this: an atom is a molecule, and Adam was a maricon, but if he would have never ate the apple, he'd be mad, sad, and would have never pulled the leaves off of Eve and seen all that ass. Also, this wonderful line over here that he says about the American flag is a doozy, which doesn't seem to be a part of some kind of greater context or anything like that. He just kind of puts that nasty little bar out there. Not to mention all the weird philosophical contradictions on this album. Ab-Soul seems to be on both sides of the aisle of a few different political issues, most notably feminism, or women's rights, or just basically the treatment of women in general. But this is an issue that he returns to numerous times on this album. I mean, maybe not so much that it's the concept, but it's certainly the most prominent theme on this record. And he talks so much about it, even though some of what he says seems kind of ridiculous, there has to be something to what he's trying to do on this record. He has to be building some kind of point, or at least maybe being purposefully inconsistent as a way to fuck with the listener. He will write a song like
Threatening Nature,
where in the lyrics he will question the fact that black women got the right to vote after black men, but then he'll have no problem whatsoever with like sexually objectifying women on a later track. Even the song Now You Know ends with a pledge to the He-Man Women Haters Club. And womanogamy is one of the weirdest concepts for a track I've ever heard. I don't even know if this is offensive or if it's progressive. I'm not even, again, sure. Ab-Soul's real thoughts, I think, are kind of smudgy on this record. They're difficult to pin down. I mean, even on the song BRAILLE, as he repeats over and over on the refrain that everything's been done before, nothing's original, yada yada, then he comes straight out to say, but you've never heard it like this. And even if it seems like Ab-Soul isn't sticking to one idea or taking himself all that seriously on this album, there are a couple spots toward the end of the record where he employs some serious conspiratorial stoner logic, like on the track Evil Genius. But for the most part on this thing, Ab-Soul is playing it sort of tongue-in-cheek and difficult to read. Like on the song Invocation, where he directly repeats lines from the track Bohemian Grove from his big breakout album Control System, and then immediately in the midst of repeating those lines, repeating that refrain, he stops himself, he interrupts himself to say, oh, haven't I been here before? Haven't I said this before? There are plenty of moments on this thing where he's creatively offensive as well, like on this gem of a line, back to reality, sadly, I'm actually Jewish, or whatever Jewish to call me. Of course, this comes right after a line about sucking Jesus's penis on Venus, and there's a wonderful bar on the song Beat the Case where he raps about beating it like a runaway slave. The lyrics on this record are highly quotable, but they're all very kind of tasteless and have a similarly dark sense of humor. Kind of reminds me of Eminem's sense of humor from back in the day, but of course updated for 2016 and tagged with the type of head in the clouds, third eye, otherworldly mindset that you can only get from Ab-Soul, which even on this record itself, he parodies a little bit, like on the song Wifey vs. Wi-Fi, where he makes reference to you texting him if you have your third eye phone. This album is odd, man. It's weird. Just like Ab-Soul, it's difficult to pin down. I don't feel like it's this conscious, heady listen or anything like that, but it's not a casual listen either. This album is dense. There are a lot of twists. There are a lot of turns. There are a lot of lyrics that, even though they may be making a dirty joke once you get to the nitty-gritty of it, you actually have to think of the bar. You actually have to think of the lyrics and how the wordplay works in order to really get it. There are all sorts of tracks on here where there's like a weird detour toward the finish that's actually pretty interesting. Some very experimental and progressive instrumentals, odd flows. Now, this isn't always for the best. The song God's a Girl feels kind of disorganized, disheveled, not all that well structured. Meanwhile, the track Now You Know is a little aimless in my opinion, feels a little kind of redundant. The verses don't contrast that well from the choruses. But not every moment on this record is blatantly left field. There are plenty of tracks on this thing where the hook is really catchy or the flow is really catchy. The song Raw that kicks the album off, Ab-Soul comes through with this kind of slow, lumbering, slurred flow that I remember pretty vividly from that Waka Flocka Flame song, M-O-N-E-Y, from his Flockavelli 1.5 mixtape, which he might have gotten from somewhere else. I'm not entirely sure. Most likely the case, but that's what it directly reminded me of when I had heard it. Also, Braille, incredibly catchy. Huey Knew Then, incredibly catchy. And it feels like Ab-Soul, in a way, is making more accessible music without sort of making those mainstream commercial music concessions that he did on These Days. I get that maybe in a sense he was trying to parody some of the mainstream rap that he was toying with on that record, but it seemed like he was coming so close to making it in the midst of creating that parody that he was just making that music, if you get what I'm trying to say here. And as much as I didn't really care for These Days, I did come away from that project feeling like there was something to it. Still though, trying to make something with a more commercial edge isn't something that Ab-Soul has completely given up, which is most definitely the case on the track The Law with Mac Miller and Rhapsody, and which features in the background a very glitzy, glamorous, jazzy, smooth instrumental. And then one of the other lead singles from this record, Drugs, is a super catchy track, and not really a banger or an aggressive track or all that poppy of a cut, in my opinion. It's a very slow, moody ballad that takes a rap singing angle that I wouldn't have imagined Solo to pull off as well as he does on this cut. It's very woozy, it's very intoxicating. I enjoy the sentiment of the song too. His love, his passionate love for drugs really comes through. Outside of that, I don't know if there's much else I want to say about the record. I do think generally the last third is the weakest point of the album. Some of the song's least likable tracks and most messy tracks come through there, and just generally in the second half. I think the album starts off really strong, features some of Ab-Soul's best and most creative and off-the-wall material. There are a lot of great ideas, instrumentals, and verses on this thing, but I can't help but feel like he's so close to coming through with a concept, maybe inadvertently, that once he realized he was just on the precipice of doing something maybe about the gender dynamics in the modern age, because again, he does bring up the male-female thing quite a bit, then maybe he should have just taken that full step and just done it. But then again, being preachy like that isn't really Ab-Soul's MO. You know, there are just a couple tracks on this thing I don't care for because there's not that much oomph or viscera to them. They feel a little unfinished, or the topic that comes through isn't all that clear, or in the case of the last song on here, YMF, the flow is a little goofy, a little silly, comes off kind of amateurish. But for the most part, I think Ab-Soul has come through with a good project, big improvement on These Days, takes more risks, drops some clever and funny bars, successfully pulls off making a record that is left field, is odd, is kind of on the fringe, but I think has a pop sensibility to it. And hopefully moving forward, he continues to challenge listeners with his mix of creative instrumentals, thoughtful wordplay, but a very dirty words. I'm feeling a light to decent 7 on this album. Tran, have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe, and please don't cry. Just leave an angry comment if you're angry. Anthony Fantano, Ab-Soul. Other links next to my head, videos, subscribe to the channel, official website. Do what thou wilt. Forever.